This video is going to be looking at the sources which cover the period between the end of the Persian War and the start of the First Peloponnesian War, particularly looking at the initial relations between Athens and Sparta and then the growth of what's called the Delian League. So there's going to be a nice variety of sources here. We've got some Thucydides, some Plutarch and some Diodorus. So these sources are now going to be leaving behind Herodotus most of the time. He only pops up, I think, once in our next section. So we now have our new major author, which is this gentleman called Thucydides, who we will talk about in lesson in a lot more detail. But he writes about the Peloponnesian War, and he looks at the end of the Persian War as part of the causes of the Peloponnesian War, which he is right, and that's the sort of issues that we're going to be looking at within these particular sources in the next couple of videos. So as he points out right here is the account of how Athens came to be in the position to gain such strength. So he's going to outline how Athens came to prominence in this particular period. So it's straight after the Persian War. We know that because the Persians had retreated from Europe, defeated by the Hellenes on land and sea. So the Greeks had won the Persian War and the Persians had retreated. And we have the Spartan king takes with him some allies from the Peloponnese and they decide to go home. The Athenians, however, with the allies from Ionia and the Hellespont, stay behind and they besiege the city of Sestos. So Athens is kind of punishing the Persians. The Spartans have done their job. They go, fine. This is not bad relations. It's just what happened at the end of the Persian War. What we do also start to see, though, is the Athens obviously need to rebuild their city because it had been destroyed by Xerxes. So the Athenian people start rebuilding on their city and their fortifications. So these are the walls that surround the city because everything had been destroyed. So you can have this when we talk about effects of conflict. We can have that obviously an effect because they've got to pay for all of this, obviously. And we know that they are economically going to be struggling because the houses are in ruins. Now, Sparta starts getting a bit worried about the rebuilding of the fortifications. Not the city, the city's fine, but they're worried about Athens rebuilding the walls. So Athens heard of what was going on and they sent an embassy to Athens. They sent somebody to talk to Athens. They themselves did not like the idea of Athens or any other city being fortified. For whatever reason, they don't like the idea of these city walls. Partly because they were urged on by their allies. So when one of the things we've looked at, I'm going to change the colour to highlight it a bit more clearly, is that allies are pushing for conflict. So this is a prime example of that. You have one of Sparta's allies, unnamed, is telling the Spartans they should be upset about this, not necessarily because Athens are doing anything wrong. And these allies who are upset about it are alarmed by the sudden growth of Athenian sea power and by the daring which the Athenians had shown in the war against the Persians. So the Athenian kind of like power is starting to grow and the Spartan allies are upset about this. Keep in mind that these guys are all still within the Hellenic League. The Hellenic League at this point still stands. So the Spartans propose Athens refrain from building her own fortifications and she should join with them in pulling down all the fortifications which still existed in cities around outside the Peloponnese. So that's sort of self-explanatory. There's a weird pause, sorry. Now, Athens doesn't like being told what to do as much as Sparta doesn't like being told what to do. So they hear this speech from the Spartan embassies and the Athenians, on the advice of Themistocles, who's still around, immediately sent them away with the reply that they would send an embassy to discuss the points that had been raised. So we'll have a think about it and then we'll send an embassy to discuss it further back in Sparta. Once the embassies from Sparta go, Themistocles then proposed that they should send him to Sparta at once, but don't send the other delegates to go with him. So he's going to go ahead of the other people. And when he is sent to Sparta, he tells them they should wait until they shouldn't send the other people until they had brought their fortifications high enough to be able to be defended. And because it's going to cost a lot of money, no private house or public spending which might be of any use to the work was to be spared. So they're going to pour all their money into the rebuilding of the fortifications. So these what are called the long walls. So Themistocles goes, tells them what to do, that's fine. He arrives in Sparta and does not approach the Spartan government, but kept putting off things for various excuses. And he sort of says, I am waiting for my colleagues. I mean, this is part of Themistocles' plan. This is typical Themistocles. I mean, we know him from the Persian War. He's a bit of a trickster. This is him just being him again. So he's kind of putting off the Spartans to allow Athens to have time to rebuild their walls, the fortifications. And they believe him because obviously he was very well respected. He'd fought really hard in the Persian Wars. He was very successful, really important at Salamis. But at the same time of him kind of going, oh, I'm just waiting for my colleagues, just wait for my colleagues to turn up, other people arrive, all positively certain that fortifications were being built. So the Spartans kind of thinking, wait a minute, what is Themistocles up to? Themistocles finds obviously that they've been telling them this, and he sort of says, don't be led astray by rumours. They ought to send some reliable people of their own and go and see for themselves. Don't listen to rumours. Don't listen to kind of hearsay. If you're so worried about it, I'll stay in Sparta. You go off and have a look at the walls yourself and see that we're not rebuilding the fortifications. So the Spartans do this, but Themistocles sends secretly to Athens, telling Athenians to keep the Spartan envoys there, but don't let them go until his colleague had gotten back. So another guy had eventually arrived and had told him that the fortifications were now sufficiently advanced. So they're sort of trying to stop the Spartans from realising how far these fortifications had been built. The Athenians follow instructions to detain the Spartan delegates. They're not like held hostage or anything, but they're just kind of delayed somewhere else. Themistocles then approaches the Spartan authorities and tells them that, Athens has been fortified, and if you have an issue with it, they should be prepared to recognise the Athenians were capable of making up their own minds, both about their interests and about the interests of the rest of Greece. I guess Themistocles has a point. He's not doing it necessarily in a massively rude way. He's just like, we're Athens, we've been destroyed. I think we're allowed to build our own cities and build our own walls back up again for our own protection. And the Spartans kind of are a bit put out, but they accept it because they joined in accounts of the Spartans. It's clear that no one else had offered better advice. They thought it was better than the city to be fortified. Oh no, it's not Spartan, sorry. So that's the reasoning he gives. They'd fought with Sparta during the Persian War. They'd listened to the Spartans in the military campaigns because, the Spartans are Spartans. And now we think it should be fortified. Again, like I said, I think Themistocles has a fair point here. Spartans show no open signs of displeasure towards the Athenians. They sort of go, okay, fair enough. This is a time when Sparta was particularly friendly with Athens, so we still have them working together. They're still within the Hellenic League because the courage displayed by Athens against the Persians. So they're remembering things like the Battle of Marathon in particular, Plataea, Salamis, etc. So they're not just going to, throw away the Hellenic League just because Athens has rebuilt its city walls. But secretly they are a bit annoyed. Probably more because they were lied to than necessarily I think the walls were being built. Anyway, got more evidence of it. So the Athenians fortify the city in a very short time, and Thucydides very helpfully tells you that they build all sorts of stuff to make the walls really tall because they're trying to do it really quickly. Themistocles then also persuades them to complete the walls of Piraeus. So this is the main port that Athens uses. So these good figures have fortified the city, and they fortify the port. That's, if you imagine there's like a map of Greece here. There's Athens, there's the port. So they build fortifications around the Piraeus, and they build the city around Athens. And again, really unexciting information about the height of the wall here and how wide it was, so we're going to skip over that. And the Athenians fortify the city and generally strengthen their position. Okay. What we then have in the next section is an issue within the Hellenic League. So remember, the Hellenic League always has a Spartan commander at the head because they're Spartans and they're the great military generals. So we have Pausanias. So this is the same Pausanias that we met at Plataea, and Machaio. So he's sent out from Spartan command of Hellenic forces. Sure. He had with him 20 ships from the Peloponnese. The Athenians joined his force with 30 ships, and they're a number from other allies, so very much a Hellenic League working together. And they decided to go to Cyprus and win over the island. Now, the reason why they're going to Cyprus is they're trying to get rid of Persian influence on Greek lands, which is part of the purpose of the Hellenic League, is to push the Persians out of Greece. So this is the Hellenic League working together to do what they're meant to do. And they go to Byzantium as well, and they are successful. However, this is where things start to go wrong. So Pausanias had already begun to reveal the arrogance of his nature and was becoming unpopular with the Hellenes, so the Greeks, particularly so with the Ionians and those who've been recently liberated from Persian domination. So he is basically being a bit of pain. He's not very nice. It mentions in a later source why he's not considered being very nice, but he's not very nice. And he treats the Greeks really badly, who were within the Hellenic League. So the Ionians and these other states approach the Athenians to take them under their protection, and Athens is quite happy with this particular situation. Probably because they don't like Pausanias very much either, but nobody liked Pausanias. Now, Sparta obviously hears about what has happened, so they recall Pausanias to face a court of inquiry in connection with the very reports they received. So they are trying to kind of solve the problem. They realise that Pausanias is being a pain in the backside, so they recall him to try and keep the Hellenic League happy. However, because of his unpopularity, the allies, apart from the soldiers of the Peloponnese, had already gone over to the side of the Athenians. So you start to see here a split within the Hellenic League. Now, the league has not split yet, but it is getting to the point where it's about to split. At Sparta, Pausanias was condemned for various acts of injustice against individuals, but he was acquitted on the main count. So he was accused of collaborating with the Persians. That is one of the main. I thought he was going to list them before he didn't. He's found not guilty of that. Supposedly there's evidence, but they choose to not convict him on it. So they sort of send out another commander. So send out this guy called Dorcius, I think, or Dorcius. I don't think it really matters. Dorcius is quite amusing though. And some small forces. But by this time, the allies were no longer willing to accept them as supreme commanders. So here you have the Hellenic League is now breaking up. So as they realise they're smart to go back, and after they send no other commanders. Partly because they fear when their officers went overseas they would become corrupted, as what had happened to Pausanias. So the Spartans are always a little bit obsessed with this idea that if Spartans leave Sparta, they become less Spartan, which has kind of happened with Pausanias. He hadn't been acting in a particularly Spartan way, although he had sort of been treating like everyone like Spartans. So they sort of just not abandon's too strong a word. They essentially just don't try and fulfill the commandership of the Hellenic League instead. So they regarded the Athenians as being perfectly capable of exercising sort of command, and at that time was still friendly. So they're not worried about the fact that Athens is taking over the Hellenic League, because they're still friendly with Athens. They're still technically allied. This is not the start of a war. This is just the Hellenic League is breaking up. So what the Athenians do is they send out this guy called Aristides, who's really good. And he also sent out a guy called Simon. And I know it doesn't look like he's been called Simon, but his name is Simon. And these two guys are good guys. So they are both generals. And so Aristides is sent out and he saw Pausanias and the other Spartan commanders proving harsh and tiresome for the allies. So he sort of takes himself and he mingles with them and he treats them really quite nicely. And he also makes sure that Simon's also accommodating. So they sort of are starting to win over the allies. So in this way, he took over the leadership without the Spartans noticing. So is this Athens undermining the Spartans' command to take control of it? Maybe. Or is it just that Aristides and Simon saw an opportunity and went with it? Maybe. Or maybe that Aristides and Simon are just generally quite nice guys. That is also a maybe, as you will see with more evidence. So we have Pausanias' greed and harshness were particularly important in making the Athenians desirable, because Aristides was fair and Simon noble. So in comparison, they look better, and they were just generally quite nice. Pausanias is really rude. He punished the troops with beatings. They had to wait till the Spartans had taken water. So this is all just Pausanias being a pain. And Aristides had tried to tell Pausanias what was going wrong and you need to treat these guys better, and he just scowled and said, I haven't got time to hear this, and didn't listen. So Pausanias obviously sort of gifts the Athenians the power to take over the Hellenic League. I'm not entirely convinced that's what the Athenians were aiming to do, but it certainly seemed to fall into their laps a little bit. So as a result of this, various Greek naval and military commanders, particularly the Chians, Samians, and Lesbians, went along to Aristides and tried to persuade him to accept the leadership. So you've got key allies, that's Chios, Samos, and Lesbos. Aristides says, yeah, I will, but I need a pledge in the form of an action which, once taken, would not allow the troops to transfer their allegiance back again. So he says, basically, when you leave the Hellenic League and join with us, you can't leave. You have to stay with us. So we've got an evidence here of the beginning of some Athenian dominance and control of the other allies. So essentially what they do is they attack a boat, and that sort of shows that they're loyal, which is what this bit here talks about. They told him to go away and think himself lucky to have a share of their glory at Plataea. That is Pausanias shouting this basically at the Athenians and the other allies. So, Plataea is seen as a Spartan victory. Even the Athenians and other allies were there, but Pausanias is upset and like, you're lucky to have any glory in it, and goes off in a bit of a strop. As a result, they revolt and they go over to the Athenians. So pretty self-explanatory here. And then we have some Diodorus, which is going to go over basically exactly the same ground, but with slightly different quotes. What we have is the Spartans show their resentment. They'd lost the command of the sea for no good reason, so they're really annoyed that these Greek states had revolted for them. The Spartans debated whether to go to war with the Athenians over the command of the sea, and they think if they do, they'll get loads of money and Sparta will be really great and powerful. However, they decide not to do it because this guy here, who I'm trying to read who it is, he's just one of the Spartans, kind of says it's really not worth it. Let the Athenians have the command of the sea because they're really good at sea. Sparta's pretty rubbish at it, so just leave it. And they decide not to make war. So essentially, what we now have is the split of the Hellenic League. It is now no longer. We now have two groups of different Greek allies. So on the one side, I scroll down a wee bit, we have the Delian League. So the Delian League is Athens and their allies, just to clarify that. And on the other side, we have the Peloponnesian League, which is Sparta and her allies. So Thucydides is going to go through the formation of the Delian League. So Athens took over the leadership and the allies. And as part of the Delian League, they assessed the various contributions to be made for the war against Persia. So the Delian League is still set up initially as to get rid of Persian influence in Greece. Even though they've pushed them out of Cyprus and other lands, there are other places they want to go to try and get rid of the Persians completely. So that is the official reason for the Delian League being set up. Okay, it's not to fight the Spartans, it is to get rid of Persian influence. So if you're in the Delian League, you have to either pay money or send ships. Fine. Object being to compensate for themselves for the losses by ravaging the territory of the king of Persia. So they kind of get the money back by getting rid of Persian rule. So the original sum for the tribute is 460 talents, which it's a lot of money, but it's not like a ridiculous amount of money. And the treasury of the league is at Delos, hence why it's called the Delian League, because of Delos. Okay, so they have representative meetings, that's fine. So the leadership of the Athenians began with the allies, who were original independent states, and reached a decision in the General Congress. I'm just losing my track of thoughts there. So that's that's how they originally formed. Those key allies who are independent. Some of these actions of so they start then sort of doing actions against the Persians. Thucydides jumps a little bit ahead, which is why I got a bit muddled for a second then. Some of these actions were against the Persians, like it was supposed to be. Some against their own allies when they revolted, which we'll talk about later. And some against the Peloponnesian powers, which is obviously the Spartans and their allies. And then he kind of says, I'm going to talk about this in the rest of my book, which is why I haven't highlighted that particular part of the paragraph. Excuse me. Bit of a tickle. Right, so then we have a little bit more information about Aristides. So Aristides' conduct in general was compared to Pausanias amongst the allies, and as a result of their admiration for Aristides, the enthusiastic submitted him to in every matter because he's just an all-round great guy. They're willing to accept whatever he tells them to do, and as a result enables him to take over the supreme command by sea without having to face any danger. So he's just able to slot in and take over from Pausanias. So he decides to impose a levy on all the cities according to their means for the war. So the tribute initially, which is what this is describing here, is done by how much each city-state can afford. It's not like a blanket amount. So he sort of takes into account what people could pay, which is obviously very fair. So he shared out the amount so precisely and fairly that all the cities were well pleased. So everyone is happy, and he's known as Aristides the Just. Like I said, Aristides is a good guy. Everyone likes Aristides because he's just lovely. Anyway, sorry, I really like Aristides, as you become across in the sources. So even while the Spartans were leading, the Greeks made contributions to the war. So Plutarch is making the point that even in the Hellenic League, everybody had to pay into money. So what the Delian League is doing is not necessarily particularly weird. So because of Aristides, instructing consider the land and income of each city and fix the contributions according to the resources of each. So again, as I said, it's really, really fair. It says the contributions not only justly, but in a way that was kind and fitting for everyone, so everyone's happy. The allies of the Athenians sang the praises of Aristides' assessment as a stroke of good fortune for Greece, particularly when not long afterwards tribute was doubled and then tripled. So very early on in the Delian League, the tribute starts climbing very, very quickly. But because it's Aristides doing it, they accept it because he's such a nice guy. They're happy with it, and it gives you some examples that later on that the guy called Pericles adds to it. And then after the Pericles' death, there's a type of politician called a demagogue that when we come on to it, we'll talk about in more detail. But essentially, a demagogue is someone who sort of manipulates the people for their own ends or for the good of the city. So you could say that Themistocles is a demagogue when he did the lie about needing to build the ships against Aegina when it's used for the Persian War. So other demagogues raise it little by little until they brought it up to 1,300 talents. So this is a really good effects of conflict evidence in terms of economic effects of conflict. So initially we have the tribute being really fairly done, and then as the war goes on, it goes up loads. So if you think initially it's 460 talents, it's gone up to 1,300 talents. So, it's a huge increase for the different city-states. And they're doing this because they entice the people into distributions of money, payments for public shows, and constructing cult statues and temples. So Athens is able to use this money as the Peloponnesian War goes on to beautify the city, to make it look nice, which is obviously a positive economic effect of conflict for Athens, not so much for the allies who are having to pay for all this to happen. So we now have our two leagues. So we've got the Delian League, we've got the Peloponnesian League. So this section of the sources, sorry, I'm just double checking something, that's fine, go back up to the top, is going to talk about the first actions that the Delian League takes. I really like Thucydides because he's not like Herodotus, he just gets to the point. He just tells you what you need to know. So the first action of the Athenians was the siege of Ion, occupied by the Persians. So they are getting rid of the Persians, as they said they're going to do, under the command of Simon, who, as you now know, is the son of Miltiades, which is why he's so good. They captured the place and made slaves of the inhabitants, which isn't very nice. They then take Skyros, which was populated by these guys. They enslave the inhabitants, spot a pattern here, and then colonize the island for themselves. Then they attack these guys, and they surrender on terms. Now, so they're doing all sort of getting rid of the Persians, and then are attacking other places. Now, at this point, really, 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 really important event happens. It's so important, I'm going to highlight it in a different colour, which is, I'm going to change the green to pink, and then I'll explain it. What we have here is Naxos, who was a member of the Delian League, leaves the league. They decide they don't want to be in the league anymore. And interestingly, Athens then makes war on the place, and Naxos is forced back into the allegiance. So what you have here is a turning point in the Delian League. So up until that point, the Delian League, if you remember, that's fine, and you're allowed to leave. That's one of the terms of the Delian League. You don't have to be in it forever. You're allowed to leave. But what Athens does with Naxos is they don't let them leave, and they're forced back into the league. So a lot of historians pinpoint this particular moment with Naxos as being the moment when the Delian League shifts into the Athenian Empire. So hopefully you are annotating all of that onto your source book, because it's really, really important. Like, super emphasizing how important this is. Okay? I think I've made my point. So it gives you reasons why Naxos and other allies chose to revolt. It's because of failures to produce the right amount of tribute or the right numbers of ships, and sometimes a refusal to produce any ships at all. So they don't like the terms of being in the Delian League, essentially. That's what Thucydides is trying to tell you. And the Athenians insisted on obligations being met exactly. So you have to meet what you've been told to pay. So that's why they're also being unpopular. So they made themselves unpopular by bringing the severest pressure to bear on allies who were not used to making sacrifices and did not want to make them. So Athens is very much acting now more like a bully. They're not helping their allies. Allies have been forced to pay. Some of them don't want to pay because they can't pay, or they have to make sacrifices to pay, and Athens starts to attack them and treat them really badly. And this made it all the easier for them to force back into the alliance any state that wanted to leave it, because they haven't got enough forces because they give it all over to Athens. Had assessments by which, instead of paying ships, they had to pay a corresponding sum of money, and the result of that is the Athenian navy grew strong at their expense, and when they revolted, I'll highlight this as well, they found themselves inadequately armed. So because of the nature of the Daily League, it was weakening the allies within it and strengthening Athens instead. Okay, we then have battles on the river of Eurymedon, forced on land onto by the Athenians and their allies against the Persians. So the Daily League is still doing its job, it's getting rid of the Persians. The Athenians win the victory on the same day under the command of Simon, always good, and they capture a load of boats, which is always good. Then we have another revolt within the Daily League, with the revolt of Thasos, caused by disputes over the markets on the mainland and over the mine under the control of the Thasians. So essentially Athens sails across and they win, and they land on the island, and they start to besiege sort of Thasos, which is what this is describing. Oh, here it is, sorry. Battle now besieged. So Thasos appeals to Sparta and urges her to come to help with their aid by invading Attica. The Spartans promise to do so, and they would have done, except there's a really big earthquake, and then there is a revolt of the Helots. And because of the Helot revolt, they can't do anything about it. They can't come and help Thasos. So the Thasians, after 3 years of being besieged, it's a long siege, have to accept the Athenian terms. Their walls are demolished and their navy surrendered, ordered to pay an indemnity immediately, so like a fine, and pay tribute in the future. So again, you've got another Athenian ally who wants to revolt, isn't allowed to leave the alliance, and they're forced back in, and they have to pay even more towards the Daily League. So like I said, this is like examples of Athens really not treating their allies very well. So I'll highlight that because it's the same issue as with Thasos. Right, so the allies continue paying tribute but failed to provide men and ships according to their assessment, and were already refusing to go on campaign. They don't want to send ships anymore because, hang on, I'm going to highlight this in a different colour. There we go. On the grounds there was no need for warfare, since the barbarians were removed and causing no more trouble. So in the Daily League, remember I've said it several times, the Daily League is designed to get rid of the Spartans, get rid of the Persians on Greek lands. So the allies are going, right, we're paying money, but we're not going to give you men and ships and stuff because you've done your job. There is no need for this to happen. Another Athenian generals applied compulsion to make them do this, and those who failed are put on trial. But when Simon was general, he went in the opposite direction and did not apply force to any Greek. So he accepts money from those who are not willing to send men, and also they're willing to send ships. So he's quite happy to take the money instead. What people don't realise, which is what this bit is describing, is the Athenians, because they have all this money, they can build really good ships and afford to pay people to man the ships, and as a result, sorry, really bugs me when I've done that. The Athenian allies failed to realise they were turning themselves into subjects and slaves. Great quotes to show that the allies were unaware of what was going on, although you would think after what happened to Naxos and Thasos they would have a clue. According to Plutarch, they didn't have a clue. So no one did more to humble the great king and abase his pride than Simon, because he's brilliant. Following hard on the Persians, he was not letting them pause for breath. Sorry, this is me just being a little bit pedantic. There we go. He ravaged and destroyed some of their territories, made others revolt and come over to the Greeks, so much so that he completely cleared Asia of Persian arms from Ionia to Pamphylia. I don't know how to say that. So he's just rather spectacular. So he sails to this particular city, for example, and because they didn't want to receive the fleet or wish to revolt, he actually began to ravage the territory and attack their walls. And he's successful in the end. And they're kind of, they have to pay 10 talents and they have to join the league and take part in any future campaigns against Persia. So like I said, we've got this sort of examples where the Athenian allies are now being treated more like subjects from after the revolt of Naxos and Thasos. It's no longer the Daily League. It's very quickly he's turned from the Daily League into the Athenian Empire, which is a really key turning point in terms of the Peloponnesian War.